Afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on our next webinar. This one is more or less obviously aware of, hosted by Dementia Education, home of school IP, college IP, and university IP. Today, we're very privileged to have joining us Joe Spence and Margaret Hunnaball, are both experienced educationalists in independent and state schools and part of the School Partnership Alliance. So just to give you some context, I wrote an article on LinkedIn about collaboration, which Margaret very kindly responded to, and we got into a conversation. And I approached her, who in turn approached Joe, about actually taking part today and explaining their role in developing this partnership. So with that, I would now like to pass you over to Joe and Margaret, who are hosting this, to actually talk more about what they do and have a little discussion between them both and possibly other people as well. So over to you two then.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. And yeah, thanks for inviting us in response to that. I think it was a comment, wasn't it, about the danger of echo chambers in education. And I think one of the things that I found through my work in partnership is that when schools from the different sectors work together, they offer some new insights, and that's really important. So I'm delighted to join you today, and even more happy to be sharing this with my CEO, Joe Spence. So Joe, would you like to just kind of get us going by talking us through your experience of working with schools in cross-sector partnerships?
Thank you. Andy and Liam, thank you very much for this invitation. Delighted to be working with you now and to have this opportunity to talk about, I think, our shared passion for collaboration. I think that gene was always in me, as much as the bit of personal biography matters. State school educated, arrived by accident at a major public school for one term only, telling the then headmaster didn't want to teach, didn't believe in independent education, but what a great opportunity to start in a historic institution that I ought to learn more about. And I think then found my vocation in teaching and stayed and got to a senior role there and then straight into headship. And always, therefore, remembering how much can be learnt by independent schools from the maintained sector. And I think that's what unites Margaret and I. We may be very proud of the august institutions we've worked for and with, but we know that they will be strongest if they open themselves to what's going on elsewhere. There is only education and there is only national education. So part of our mission also is the breaking down of the 93%, 7% divide of the state and the independent schools. If only we could get to a stage where that Berlin Wall comes down and instead we have that sense of the state is at the moment affording to pay for 93% of the education of children in this country. There are other organizations, many are charitable, high fee paying charities, admittedly, which are educating the other 7%. But the benefits, if each sector learnt from each other, brought more of each other's leaders into each other's company, would be successful. This really took off for me when I became Master of Dulwich College and was proud to inherit there an existing partnership to which the college played a big part. And that was the Southwark Schools Learning Partnership. And as Margaret knows, in a way, what we're doing within SPA now is looking to extend to a national level aspects of what I thought was best in that partnership. And if that partnership has, I'm always wary of unique selling points, but a unique selling point as against some of the others, I think it's that it is one of the true partnerships of equals, led by a state school leader and an independent school leader, always led by heads. No disrespect to the great work of deputies, people with partnership titles, but the fact that two heads gave of their time and said, we are responsible, we want our schools and our collection of 18 schools to be responsible for this, was key. And in the work that we could then do in teacher training, professional development, pupil voice activities, some transformational work, lots of enhancement work. And I use that phrase deliberately, and it's one I know Margaret will want to pick up on and take apart. It is essential. But I've only ever found that there is strength in partnership and strength in opening your ears and learning from each other that can only make education for every child in this country stronger. And I think that's the key. Again, I know it's something that Margaret will press me on and I want her to also talk about her experience. Let's put it this way to start. We may be telling you lots of experiences of independent schools doing great work in partnership and great work in outreach and great work in their communities. But we believe that the independent schools that are doing best are those that are listening to and learning from the best of maintained schools, individuals, standing schools, multi-academy trusts, and the rest. So, and I suppose I'd just finish that bit by saying I pretty well defined my mastership at Dulwich College by partnership and access. We're a 400-year-old school. We were started for 12 poor scholars. I saw a 21st century version of our mission, ethos, beginnings as the work we would do with other schools and the work we would do for our community. And I won't ever change that being the point of education.
And I think, Joe, one of the things that I said to Liam and Andy earlier was you're actually the head that I most quoted in my PhD. Little did I know years later I would end up working with you. But I think that idea of, like, you know, this is not about crumbs from a table. This is about genuine two-way relationships. And I think that emphasis on relationships is huge. So my background, like Joe, I went to a state school, and I will say it was a girls' grammar school, so perhaps it was a bit more like a free independent school in some ways. But from there, I went off to university, and then I taught in the state sector for 20 years. And I was really lucky. I was at the time, the DFE gave awards for the most high achieving comprehensives, and that was one of my best moments. I was at the Burgate School and sixth form in Hampshire, and I was the one sent to receive that award. So I knew what high achieving state school practice looked and felt like. And then I changed sectors, and it was relocation to London. I found myself in a very good independent school, and I could see where excellence was, and I could see also where I could enhance with my state school experience what was happening. And then 7 years on, I ended up at a school that was steeped in partnership, and it was part of what's now a partnership that has lasted for over 20 years. And the model of it is actually really unlike Joe's experience. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting for people listening in today, is that these partnerships can come in very different shapes and sizes. So Joe was part of one that's very equitable. All the schools involved in it contribute to that, not just strategically, as Joe's suggested from the heads, but also in financial contributions. Whereas I was part of one that was initially funded by a significant DFE grant. And when that grant money was used up, a wonderful proponent of partnerships, Heather McKissock, went to the then head and said, we need this to continue. So that independent school funds everything to this day. Now, one of the things that came with that, though, you could think that this power differential is kind of a problem for the state schools involved. But actually, Heather was such a wise woman that she went out to those schools and said, we need your help. And I was there after it had been established for probably 12 years. And when I went there, we had the state schools coming in to teach us how to do learning walks, to talk to us about preparation for leadership. And across that partnership, which was then of 8 schools, all the schools participated in things that we did. So it was very much, you know, that enhancement, Joe, that you said I would challenge you on. I don't challenge you. I agree with that, but it was very much enhancement both ways. And I think that's one of the things that people lose in this, is they kind of can dismiss them as kind of superficial, but that wasn't my experience, and nor is it yours. And I think that's why we're here doing what we can to kind of spread the word. And we've kind of gone for a title today that's pretty bold, isn't it? A claim that maintained independent school partnerships can help address national education needs. So can you kind of give us a few examples of how you think we do contribute to that?
Oh, thank you, Margaret. I mean, I think the sky's the limit, and I'll just back what you've said first there. I mean, in my 8 months, I've met many people who are on side. We've got our own growing partnerships community, and financial and political and practical pressures notwithstanding, it is being maintained and built on. But I also meet from all corners, the independent sector as much as the maintained sector, some people who will say, but it's all still tokenistic. It's you can't judge its impact. We've got other places to put our emphasis. It's performative. It's the independent sector showing what they can do for their own PR. And we've been very alert to that, Margaret, and you've been with me. And one of the things that we know we're still doing and having to do with SPA is turn it from something that can be perceived as a lobby group, pressure group, defending the public benefit work of independent schools into a true cross-sector partnership organization. And we know also, and it does get back to that point of language is important, isn't it? We're being encouraged, and we know that if we're going to get the ear of government, Whitehall, potential third-party benefactors for this sort of work, regionally and nationally, we're going to have to prove it's transformatory. And some of it can be. So we will support those schools engaging in projects like the Lumina project out of Harrow School, where they are looking for mentors from all schools, mainly at the moment independent schools, but increasingly great state school teachers joining this team too, to give mentoring advice to looked after children. We know how far behind they're left. The stats are criminal for looked after children's success at GCSE, A-level, going on into university. More likely to end up in prison than university. I mean, this is just not tenable, yet we can play our part. I think what we've always got to do is play our modest part. We're not going to be the answer to everything here, but we can help other agencies that are. And Liam and Andy, before we came online, when you were talking about your organization, all you kept stressing is we want to encourage collaboration. And it's that collaborative nature that we want to capture. Perhaps sometimes at the risk of being able to say, this is our absolute impact. But also the other sorts of projects that I'd want to highlight. I mean, Radley College and all, John Moore, John Sparks, the head of partnerships there, wouldn't mind me saying, now one of the most pucker of independent schools, but the work it's doing in a very different area. I mean, Oxford is a strange place. It's a city of dreaming spires, but in South Oxford, you've got poverty, the equal of anywhere in this country, from coastal Britain to conurbation, desolation. And they are working brilliantly with children on the fringe of exclusion and keeping them in school. And how do they do it? They do it by taking them to their farm and getting them to work one day a week in a really practical way that gives them dignity, something to do, something different, and a real sense of pride. And I suppose to say in that sort of area, as in this world in which we must look for impact, we must find a way to measure the data coming out of all of our work. Nothing pleases me more than the fact that the head of partnerships at Haberdashers' Ask School can send us stats that say, do you know what? The attendance rates of the most disenfranchised of pupils in our partner schools rise by no less than 9% on the days of partnership activities, when we are offering more than the diet of the curriculum, when they can come for sporting events, cultural events, clubs and societies, things they can engage in. This is the sort of work that truly can be transformational. Yet I'll just use one other example. I had a wonderful corrective the other day. I was talking to the East Kent Schools Together group, a brilliant group, about 11 state and independent schools in East Kent, including coastal Kent there. And I was making the point, something else that no doubt Margaret and I will want to tell more about, because I think in a phrase I don't think we've used yet that's central to my philosophy, we're looking for those partnerships of equals. And I was addressing the heads and the partnership leads at these 11 schools, and I dared say, let's move away from just the concentration on events, which can enhance what good pupils are already doing, and let's look for those areas where we can really work together on embedding something in our schools. And my sort of favorite examples are, you schools, why aren't you working on your EDI-J policies together, your diversity policies together? You've got so many different schools. Make something real of that. Why aren't you working on your AI together? I've been in 3 of your schools. You've each got a new AI lead who's doing his, her, or their work in their silo. What about combining? And I'm really putting the emphasis on this. And then a deputy head from Herne Bay School just interrupted me and said, I'm not sure I like this narrative. I do not want the belittling of the sorts of activities that we've done. We went to one of the independent schools' public speaking oracy days, and I want you to know the story of X, a year 10 girl who was essentially electively mute, would not engage. She found her voice at that occasion, and you know the result, what she was able to say. She is now studying at Cambridge University. And what that made me think, as we as an organization, Liam and Andy, are thinking about how much of our work is truly transformational, how much is enhancement, and we've got to be careful that it isn't too much of the enhancement of, what we're often looking at is it middle class kids in state schools picking up some of our Oxbridge prep, and actually they'd be okay anyway. It's added a little to them. They might have more chance for an interview or a place because of it, but it is not socially transformatory. What this deputy head made me think is that one person's enhancement is another person's transformation. That opportunity was given really makes that happen. Now that will become part of our qualitative feedback rather than quantitative feedback, but it's really important to us. I could go on. I hope we'll mention more cases later, Margaret, but that sense that's why we've dared giving ourselves the title we have today. Our work may, to a large degree, be enhancing the opportunities of all children, but we know we want to find ways to be allowed to help with the transformatory, but we are not saying that we are the transformatory organization. We can help others in social care, in community work, in schools, state and independent, to do this work.
And I think one of the things that you've kind of picked up on there with your conversation from the Herne Bay one, was it's, if we can make partnerships needs focused, then that's where they become transformational. And I think there's much around enhancement. We talk about 4 different types of partnership, and the starter one, a connection, is what most people would call outreach. But actually, if the people receiving what's happening there need it, then that's fine, and that's important. And I think that the idea around things being needs focused, we've got some kind of interesting examples of where that need involves the most disadvantaged. And Joe, you've mentioned Lumina, that's a key example. But also there are some partnerships with special schools where remarkable things are being done in the performing arts, and maybe we'll touch on that later, but that was something that I was able to see firsthand when I was at King's College School in Wimbledon, a partnership production that involved pupils from 2 special schools that was just absolutely remarkable. Joe, when you were at Dulwich College, you had a close relationship with City Heights, one of the EACT academies. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that came about and what you think were the greatest achievements of that partnership? Because it was pretty special.
Oh, thank you. That's really lovely of you to say, Margaret. And what I really love is the fact that the other people who always say that are EACT, and EACT are now working with the whole of HMC. And I'm not the person who should be saying this, but what I love when I listen to their leaders talk is they always start by saying, we work with independent schools, because Dulwich College stood with us through change after change of head teacher, the problems we were having, the wondering whether the school would still be there. And what became evident to them is we were not involved for the greater glory of Dulwich College, but were involved because we wanted their school in Tulse Hill, an outlier satellite from most of the schools in the hubs that they have, to work. And they give examples of, my team and I ringing on A-level GCSE results day, their 11-16 school, and wanting to know of the results of particular cohorts we'd helped and of the school as a whole, because it mattered to us. We'd made them part of our story. How well they did reflected on Dulwich College. When they had issues, we had issues, is how I saw it, and we just had to make things better for those kids in that setting. How did we do it? It starts with what sounds like more the outreaching work, limited playing fields, so Monday morning PE, with year nines working together across the two schools, not, oh, you can use our playing fields. And that was an important principle for me, and staff working together on that. But probably the most important work was, and I know that it's EACT's mission, so I can put it this clearly. They knew they had kids for whom a 4 or a 5 was success, who had the potential to get a 7. They knew they had kids for whom a 7 was success, who had the potential to get an 8 and 9 at GCSE. And at the risk of making a political point, I mean, what they were talking about is the dangers of Govism, where the Govism of the 5 A stars to C tended to encourage state schools to say, oh, now that person's up to a 5, they will be good for our stats, so we don't really have to push any further, we'll go elsewhere. And it's that is, in the long run, in danger of dumbing down. I can't tell you how many kids I've met who, I remember when we first, Dulwich College also sponsored a startup, the Isle of Sheppey Academy, and I'd be going there and finding that kids had been doing their GCSE maths in year 10 and then allowed to stop maths because they'd got their B or their 6 or whatever. It was more in the age of Bs, and were now doing something else to get another grade. But those kids should have been doing maths at the end of year 11 and getting their A stars and potentially doing maths A level. So it's that sort of intervention that can make a difference, not just in the grade scores, but in giving a school confidence that it doesn't have to play just the game. The irony of my story is it's not about the grades. It's absolutely about the potential of those children to go further. And then I suppose head to head, senior leader to senior leader, it was support. It was just being there for them. And again, I hoped EACT would help, forgive me saying, sometimes to defend the head from the academy chain. We think X is doing well in the context we know of Tulse Hill in the southeast of London. We want to support that. We don't think it's been over defensive when he tells you the success of the school culture as against the stats. We believe this will come in due course. And it's that sort of work. And of course, when we reach that, we begin talking about something we've hinted at, Margaret, but haven't perhaps yet been explicit enough about, is what does the independent school get back? I know that those teachers involved with those projects feel they are better teachers for the work they did in that setting. Some, in fact, were appointed because they had an excellence. They're appointed to Dulwich College, where you could almost take the 7s to the 9s for granted, but they were appointed because they had a skill set that could take hold of children getting 4s and 5s, and in the way that, dare I say it, independent schools have done, turn those kids who, without the absolute expert subject knowledge teaching, won't get what they could have got, to get those higher grades. But it isn't about the grades. It's about the access to the next stage of education and the best sort of education you can offer. And then City Heights just became part of our story. Our boarders would have an international day, and we'd get an amazing day with them bringing their wares and their foods from all of their cultures. And they're in the middle of it, given the big Portuguese community in Tulse Hill in London, were your natas from City Heights, and they felt the dignity of being part of a wider story than their estate. And I think it's that sort of work that I'd say I was proudest of, and that was a germ that led to a major systems leading academy chain saying, we feel confident to work with independent schools because we realize that they mean it when they say, we want to work with you, learn from you, be at one with you. And may the Moonshot project that I've just been hearing about from EACT and HMC together at the big headmasters and headmistresses conference, may it take off. And it's going to look at oracy, opportunity and careers. And they're not a bad first three: literacy, come oracy, opportunities beyond the classroom, the co-curricular, which is second nature to the independent schools and needs to be in the state schools. And I know, Margaret, you want us to move on to talk about our passions, shared passions for music and sport, culture and sport, and how we can help through the SPA to make that more current and more valued, perhaps, in state schools that are fearing they can't do it because they've got to get the SATs right, because they've got to get the grades at GCSE and A-level.
So before we go there, I think one of the things that you've mentioned, and we had Marcus Shepherd, the former head of City Heights, speak to our last conference, and he made the point that when you came and knocked, they didn't want to answer. So they rebuffed you many times, but it was that persistence. And he said, if people tell you to go away, please keep going back until they welcome you in. And I think that's such an important thing, because, later I'll ask you for your kind of tips for anybody not involved in partnership working, Joe. But I think that really struck me, that, not all schools feel they have the capacity for entering into partnership, but actually if somebody comes back and makes it work for them, then it can certainly work. And I think just before we go on to our kind of co-curricular passions, just to think, one of the things that is stark in the maintained sector is the crisis of teacher recruitment and retention. And I wonder if you'd share with us a kind of your feel for how partnerships are making an impact there.
Thank you, Margaret, because I think you know that in asking that, you've given me rein for one of my personal passions, which is an absolute belief that we haven't yet quite tapped and trapped just how important partnership working could be for the teacher recruitment crisis. We're told that this government really wants to make a great dent in that 6,600 shortage of teachers that we have. And I suppose you take me back to that sense of what we're looking for in partnerships is where schools can meet as equals. And I don't think there's a better example than my being able to share with you that the work that Dulwich College and by extension the Southwark Schools Partnership, Learning Partnership, were able to do. Never did we meet better as equals than when we were training teachers together. So yes, it may be that Dulwich College has the ability to be the hub locally. I can give a 2/3 timetable relief to a physicist, a maths teacher, a modern linguist, who are the sort of people who so love their subject, they don't want to be heads of department. They want to make a difference in other ways. And they can lead some 60 young, aspiring teachers, often second careerers in the schemes that we're talking about, the national maths and physics skit and the national languages skit, to which we've added their brilliant project in computer science. But we can make teachers as equal, and certainly those skits which we ran at times with Silverdale, a teaching school in Sheffield, or Wickham High, an excellent school placed, which took the lead on the maths work, now taken over actually by Chorus and Silverdale, which I'm delighted by. We were learning so much from the schools that were teaching schools in the state sector. We were learning so much from having an experience of making our teachers part of the story of teacher training in the whole region. If we could replicate that nationally, I think we really could make a dent in the teacher shortage, because since around 2017 or so, just out of that one hub run out of Dulwich College, we've made over 200 teachers. And what I love about what I can add to that is a substantial number of them. I won't be tempted towards trying to pick a number out of the air, but I'm going to say it's no less than 30% of those teachers we've trained are now teaching in Southwark State schools. So we've literally made a community of teachers who stay involved. We had a 5-year reunion, I think mid-lockdown, only when we're allowed to have such reunions. And the lovely other statistic, which is so bucking national trends, is that 90% of the people we trained are still in teaching. And as I say, 30% teaching locally in the schools that have greatest need of a specialist language teacher, a specialist physics teacher, a specialist computer science teacher, or a specialist mathematician. So what I know is that where this work can be made to deliver, it can make a great difference. I have to say, the person who first really knew that could be the case was Nick Gibb. But I'd also say that although it was there as an initial idea, there was no greater investment in this, either in broadcasting it, perhaps because of the association with independent schools and it didn't politically resonate, or for other reasons. Lockdown didn't help, though we kept the programs going through that. I'd hope that's somewhere where we could go back to this new government now and say, look, we can honestly give you the stats that say we could make this difference. But I know how lucky we were to be in London, in an area where we've got that catchment of 18 schools, which can be reached so that someone could live in one place and have their 2 placements equally within the year in which they were trained, and then the year in which we continued training them after that. But it can't happen everywhere, but a version of it could happen everywhere. And if we could make that work, and I know that Newcastle, Royal Grammar School Newcastle, are pretty close to doing the same sort of thing up there, and making that part of their partnership story. I'd want that to be dotted through, certainly through the conurbations, because I can't believe that it wouldn't make a difference. And if
it's interesting, isn't it, Joe? Because I think we've got a representative actually on the call who could attest to this. But the work that the HG Foundation is now doing in its STEM Horizons program is fantastic. So they're putting a computer scientist into 5 independent school hubs, and each of those 5 schools will work with 5 state schools to educate and to spread that word. And we know of the shortage in computer science staff, so it's a brilliant initiative. And I'm really struck. So the kind of CEO of the HG Foundation, James Turner, used to be with the Education Endowment Foundation, and before that with the Sutton Trust. And the Sutton Trust has actually always had faith in these cross-sector partnerships, so much so that when they were introduced in 1997, the Sutton Trust funded, they dedicated funds equivalent to about 1/3 of what the DFE was putting into it. So a remarkable thing. But I think that those STEM Horizons hubs are going to be a really good model for actually spreading good practice in that sense. Okay, Joe, I'm very mindful of time, and you and I can talk forever on this. And it will come as no surprise to anybody who knows me that's listening to this that my passion beyond education is hockey. And I mentioned earlier Heather McKissock, and sadly we lost Heather too soon, but we established a charity in her name, the HMCK charity, that funds cross-sector partnerships where schools need a bit of help to get them going. And I'm really proud that the HMCK charity funds 3 partnerships that introduces primary students in areas that definitely would not otherwise play to hockey. So I know that we're doing our bit for my passion, Joe, but one of your passions is music. So how do partnerships impact that?
Thank you, Margaret. And I have a thank you to say to you, because long before we came into personal contact, it was a grant from you that enabled Dulwich College and Tulse Hill and Dulwich Hockey Club to start doing a Sunday program, which our partnerships lead at Dulwich, who's also a national hockey player, international hockey player, was able to start. And watching that project where you've introduced kids who would not have perhaps a chance to have realized that this could be something they do, it is the sort of transformational work. And I think that's what we love about culture and sport, that these are the areas where you can extend horizons, where you can simply create aspiration. And we know also that there is masses of potential in kids who may just never have sung together, or not in a way that they realize could be made into something that they could become their profession, their vocation, or their avocation, their hobby for life. And you and I both know that substreams of our work in SPA are going to be the defense of sport in schools, all schools, and the defense and promotion of cultural activities at a time when they're being put under threat because of expense or time or resource or expertise. And again, therefore, what a fantastic area in which we can work together. So be it the setting up of glee choirs, which bring kids from different schools together, or the setting up of summer schools that, as well as doing great work in STEM, can offer cultural opportunities. I think we see this as core work. And the other things to add, and it's a sadness to both of us that we have to add it, Margaret, of course, is that we also know that we have a job in the defense and the promotion of languages and the defense and the promotion of the humanities. Something that will interest Avencio, of course, though, is there at last, I've been having that conversation with lots of national leaders of music practice, notably within the state sector, and they're just beginning to say, do you know what, there's just the beginning of some hopeful notes out of Westminster and Whitehall along the lines of, if there are subjects where AI will take away a lot of the grunt work in the scientific areas, should we be looking for how children, young people, schools can flourish with the expressive arts? And if we can get hold of that angle and continue to promote it, I think it might be one of the great things we can do. We've certainly got a webinar later this term where we're bringing the work of Wallow, World of Languages, Languages of the World, to our community, where they're really thinking creatively about what should language learning be in the 2020s, rather than grammar and vocab and sort of learning formally a given European language. And they're great believers of what a missed opportunity not to be using the first languages of so many kids now in English schools who are bilingual. It's not that England is now a monolingual country. It's probably never been less a monolingual country. But do we have a, dare I call it, an imperial snobbishness about which languages we should learn and how we should learn them? And if we can help their work, that would be superb, just as we hope to maintain choral singing, maintain orchestral and chamber music playing. So I'm delighted, again, if I go a little parochial, I leave behind at Dulwich and in Southwark some fantastic Saturday school schemes in science, but increasingly in the creative arts and in music. There's a wonderful local charity in South London called Song Easel, which introduces song to young people, and they are literally this month starting their Saturday school program, which will see professional practitioners from the world of music working alongside state and independent school teachers for the betterment of music in this country. So again, as you've said, we could wax lyrical forever on this, but there's an area where we have some confidence. And going to St Paul's summer school, watching their materials sciences course this summer, which I absolutely loved. There on graduation day, see 70 kids go back to the north of England, to the Midlands, to coastal Kent, fueled with a belief that they can apply to Oxford and Cambridge and Imperial to read such a subject that they didn't even know existed at the beginning of the week. Delighted that next year they're going to do a humanities project that indeed I hope I'll be invited to come and deliver a keynote on, because we believe that all subjects have value, and it's got to be a value beyond immediate employability or how much you earn. Doing great work bringing together the Brit School with a major independent school to think about what they can do together in the world of creative learning. And as I say, perhaps more confident speaking now in October than I even would have been at the beginning of September.
Wow, thanks, Joe. And it's really interesting as well, just something that struck me there. You mentioned Saturday school and summer school. And one of the things that Bridget Phillipson said in the summer was that there would be a greater investment in summer schools so that they could run. And I just think she probably has no idea of the scale of summer schools offered across the country through partnership. And, so when I was at King's Wimbledon, we did one that the students could take one of two courses. They either did a week of sport or they did a week of performing arts. And at the end of it, they either had a sports day or they put on a performance. Amazing. Okay, I know that we're getting very close to the end. So, Joe, I think it's really important that before I ask the last question, which will be any advice you've got, that we actually acknowledge this work is not without its challenges. So is there kind of a tip that you'd give schools that are facing challenges as to how we can make successful partnership happen?
Thank you. Philip Britton of Bolton School, who's, and he would not want me to say it's personal, done the most fantastic work in that city in creating what we love quoting as the Bolton 19,000. That's the agreement of every head teacher in Bolton who's part of their partnership, that their duty is the education of the 19,000 kids of Bolton, not just their own school. He has that lovely, simple phrase, but is worth repeating as a mantra, that no school can do everything in the world of partnerships, but every school can do something. And I think I'd say, Margaret, that our work is particularly now interested in, while sustaining and cultivating and supporting and thanking the big schools for what they can do, is getting involved more with organizations like the Independent Schools Association, which has schools ranging from 3 pupils to 1,400 and an average around 200 and something, talking to their leaders and hearing their passion for what they can do with little resource and in spite of time pressures in offering something. And perhaps then also something, that I'm really keen to develop is every school's little story, if we can help coordinate the narrative, can become a great national story. So one of our streams of work for this year will be working with the School Enterprise Association in doing an audit of what is offered in swimming in schools engaging in partnership, independent, and some places, of course, state schools have a swimming pool, very few, but some, or easy access to it. Because if we could add every individual story that can be mocked as crumbs from a table or too modest, this school, this small school, allows 2 hours free use of its pool to 2 primary schools locally. It's not a story that has national weight. It shouldn't. perhaps it reaches the local paper, but we've got to be very careful that it doesn't seem to be rah rah, look what we're doing. In a way, it's a small story on its own. But if it could be times by the 350 schools doing that, we have a national story that schools engaging in partnership work are making a difference to the government's hope that all children by the age of 11 will be able to swim 25 meters unaided. And I think it's that sort of work that is our work. It's the coordination of work, the frameworking of work, the pushing to areas, low-hanging fruit perhaps, where a difference can be made. And I'd go back to my thing, of course, it wouldn't really cost, it might even save schools who unite on doing some policy work together. That's partnership. That is real partnership of equals. So let's look for those creative ways where it isn't time and money expensive, but can really make a difference in a locality or perhaps nationally. And that's the work that we can help with.
Okay.
I'd love to just jump in there, Margaret, with an additional question. So you say there on how to make these partnerships successful. And I'd love to know how you can bring in the wider school community in on that success and that engagement. And we see it as a software company, as a school improvement solution provider. Heads come in, or the SLT come in, and they make a decision and they say, you know, we really want to work with this school in a wider scenario. But how do you get to sort of example that added value to the wider staff team, to the students who are going to be involved in that? How do you get them to engage with that process?
So if I give you an example, so one of the partner schools for KCS Wimbledon was Coombe Girls' School, and I'm now a trustee of the Academy Trust because I was part of that partnership and they haven't let me go. And one of the things that I was blown away by was they invited me in to do their prize giving. And at that prize giving, which was full of parents and girls, they had a review of the year, and part of the review of the year was a 7-minute video of all the partnership working they'd done. So every person in that room, whether they were staff or pupils, everybody saw the power of the partnership working. And I think that's a really interesting thing. So one of the findings of my research is that partnership can just be in hidden corners in schools. So I think the more that things are shared, so at King's we always had an item in our staff meetings, which was partnership update. And I think that when people commit, it's an interesting question for potential partners to ask each other is how do we make this a whole community thing and not just those interested parties? Go on, Joe, I can see you've got something to add.
No, well, I love the fact you've taken that angle. I suppose I'd say, Liam, that what you made me think about is more something we haven't spoken about, and maybe for your audience, when you post this, it won't be where they're most interested, but we are so aware that our work this year needs to be proof of impact, that we need to find a national framework that can gather together the 9,500 individual projects that are going on and give them some sort of coherence and some sort of sense of a measurement that, like my swimming is going to be one of the easier ones, can actually say this is where we're making a difference. Because I think, you know, as we veer from the quantitative can be fine, but even the quantitative can be undermined. You know, 60 kids attended that. So what? What was the result? We need to get more outcome reporting as well as input reporting. But people are busy and don't want to fill in another form. And they loved it for its own sake. And they don't want to just be part of a national quantifying. So we've got to find a way to make that easier. Maybe, you know, setting up our own website function that will have within it an ease of measurement that can say this is what's delivered. And also, I'd love us to be more warts and all. This is what doesn't work. This is where we're having struggles. This is where a lot of people are putting a lot of emphasis, but it's not suggesting it's best placed. And I took a long while. I was I loved the broad brushness of SSLP would do everything. It was my state school partners really more than anyone else, who got me to be more strategic. Don't just offer another talk and open it to us. We want to concentrate on this. And it was with them that there grew far more a sense of what's our theme for the year. Are we looking at race? Are we looking at gender together? Are we looking at neurodiversity? Are we looking at sustainability? And having a focus where we know that kids, we haven't talked enough about them and their role in this, because when they get excited about being in each other's company, everything else disappears. The head teacher who's been remote, when their kids come back to them and say, I've loved this, on either side of the inverted commas divide between state and independent, that makes a difference. So really taken with that intervention, and glad to have a chance both to talk about communities and community practice, and how partnerships, when they're real, begin to resonate in their communities. We're going next week to Norwich, and Norwich School are the least rah-rah about what they do, but my goodness, they, in their community, in working with charities, in setting up events that they hardly put their name to that happen, show the power of partnership in community. And that sense that I think is the future for schools, that they are going to have to be one-stop shops for what a community needs. And if we can play our part in that as well, I'll be very excited.
Well, thank you both, because while you've all been talking, I've been trying to process everything that you've said. And for me personally, I wish that when I was a head teacher, I was fortunate enough to meet both of you. In my career, I've taught through grammar schools all the way to schools of high deprivation. And what I've noticed, and what I came up with, 3 strap lines that more or less sum up this. One is breaking down barriers.
Good.
One is breaking the norm. And the other one is stronger working together. There's 3 strap lines that are coming from here. And one thing that in those different areas, and now obviously, there's another colleague here on the call as well, that if they want to talk, then please, I don't want to interrupt them. But what I noticed in each of those schools, it wasn't just the school that worked in silos, it was actually the students and their aspirations that worked in silos. And I came across students who had already labelled themselves, depending on the school they were in, that they were not going to even get as far as take A levels, irrespective of their intelligence and IQ level. And we used to test them. They had no aspirations to go from there to then secondary school. They had no aspirations to be clever, because what actually happens is if they were deemed as clever, they were more or less vindicated, picked on, everything else like that. So the idea of aspirations, the idea of giving them the opportunity and breaking that mold is wonderful. I was just making different things, because I think the idea of pupils, students having the opportunity to work together collaboratively gives an insight into everybody else, the same as teachers understanding, because I know as a teacher and a head teacher, if you're teaching students, and feel free to interrupt me, that are engaged and passionate, they are not a barometer of the standard of teaching. Whereas on the other hand, if you have challenging children, they are a barometer. So the point is, it's about developing your teaching to suit who you are in fact teaching. So the more wide that people can actually develop from that, the better, because how do you, a teacher that has these students that are engaged, how do you actually get a disengaged person? Or is it, if you happen to have a disengaged person, how dare they be in here, and all of a sudden they're sidelined as having some kind of need that we can't address, and that type of thing. And I think that's the type of thing. And also what you said, which I'm very passionate about, is in my background, I've never been test orientated, and our world is about test scores, is about exam results, is about, if you haven't got this. But what people fail to understand is what is the hook to engage students, pupils, children from an early age to do education. it's not about sitting in rows, and I become very passionate about this. That what the world of education seems to have gone on with AI, but we still go into classrooms and they look the same as they did in 1918 somewhere. It's one of those things you think, well, hold on a minute. So we're trying to do the same thing but get a different outcome. But sport, culture, and all those things are things that you need to engage. Then the question I have is, yes, okay, this is the great thing, but how do we get people, schools, leaders, because of the pressures of education, not to think short term? Because it's about the short term. We've got to do this now. Because we need the results now. We need this, rather than thinking of long term and that journey of students. That if we put this in place, we'll do the foundations. But it's a bit like having an iceberg. You don't see anything above the surface until you put the stuff in the bottom. And then, I remember, different conversations with CEOs of schools. We need to do this results now, and so we need a quick fix. We need this, etc. But you're trying to do the long term. So the point is, whether it be an independent school with short term, as say, crikey, we've got to get bums on seats. We haven't got the capacity. We haven't got money to invest in state schools. We need to get this. We need to get that. And then you've got independent state schools who are going, yeah, well, I've got to get these SATs results. I've got to get this. So the children aren't children. They're actually a statistic. So the point is, going on your journey and doing that, I passionately believe in. I wish I'd met with you. But the point is, it is a journey, isn't it? And I think that's what you have to do about understanding. And I suppose you've got to come across leaders that are willing to be outside the norm, same as we are as a company, to not do the norm, not as in that way, because as you mentioned about Brit School, we work with Brit School about what they're developing, and we create solutions that actually we want to showcase, for example, good practice of teaching that then can be celebrated throughout the school. Imagine if we had the ability to identify good pockets of teaching and learning and school improvement, that we then had the ability to then showcase not only in one school, but then to showcase across a group of schools. So you picked out all those things. So I'm going to stop now, because obviously you have a chance now to say, after I've just relieved all this stuff.
You've got Margaret and I fighting for space.
Let me go first, Joe, because you'll talk about a lot more. I just wanted to pick up on kind of two things there. One is looking at that long-term vision, Andy. I think governors have a really strong part to play in good partnership working. And I was lucky enough to do a webinar with the NGA last week, and just saying to governors, ask that question: what can we offer, and what more could we gain by working with other local schools? And the other one was just to touch on that silos thing, because one of the best pieces of practice I've seen is in the York Independent State School Partnership, where they hold their activities out of school hours, and every student wears their own clothes. So what you don't do is you don't get what I've seen in some activities where you can tell who's from the school with the red uniform because they sit there and the blue uniforms sit there. These kids walk through the door, they all look the same, and you've actually taken away another little bit of that silo in a really subtle way. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Joe now.
Oh, no, they're two lovely examples, and I wish you hadn't rushed them to give me space, Margaret, because I think that's gorgeous. What Andy's question made me think about is closing by giving a name check to the sort of organizations we're working with. And you know what, Andy, what I hadn't really thought of until you put the point you just put is what unites them is long-termism. So I've literally, and he won't mind me saying, yesterday wrote to Stuart at the Brit School and to Richard Jones at Bryanston, who I'm hoping will, and I know they're going to work together, about the big education project, which is rethinking school, because these are schools that are not saying, schools shouldn't be judged on next year's SATs or results. What are we really doing for the future? Another organization we're working so closely with now is the Foundation for Educational Development, and they've spent the last decade on, we can't start from a new day one, but we can honestly say, what would a great educational system look like, and how can we over time get there? Let's break into the short-termism, often politically inspired short-termism, or perhaps parental inspired short-termism. I need it now and I need it for my child, with what would go further. And my third example, a body that I'm going to say, if you'd asked me the question, what are you proudest of, Margaret, that you've achieved so far? I'd say one of the things is bringing us into association with the National Society for Education. So National Society of Education, led by great, to me, they're very young leaders, Andy Wolf and Andy Spence, are directing education for the 5,000 Church of England schools in this country, but in a very ecumenical way, which opens their training programs to people from all settings and all faiths, not just the Church of England, believing in the Church of England's mission, that it has a responsibility as the state church for the common good. But no, Andy and Andy admit that they hadn't thought till we came to their attention that they're not working with independent schools. So I'm just back from the Headmasters' Conference where I led a session with Andy Spence on their idea of flourishing in education, flourishing leaders, flourishing schools, flourishing teachers. And one of their concepts is we are now educating the class of 2040. What do we want education to look like for them? And the lovely thing in the presentation we made together that Andy Spence put up that I think is a good thing for us all to bear in mind is he shows a photo of Durham Cathedral. And the point he's raising when he says, okay, where's that? And what's interesting about that to us is that the architects of Durham Cathedral knew they would never see it finished. And in a way, we need to be modest enough that it's not about our work and how wonderful we are. We can do a bit, but we should be projecting ahead to what will the class of 2040 and 2050 inherit if we start doing it right now. And that, Andy, is what you inspired me to think about when you talked about long-termism. And if Davencio can help us on that and you on that, then we'll have made a difference.
Because what you're doing is just sidetracking slightly, going back onto your sport analogy. If you've ever heard the quote that came from the All Blacks about the shirts and they're preparing it for the shirt of the next person.
Yeah.
And that's their mantra about that type of thing. And obviously, us as a company, we're very passionate about developing the colleagues in schools. And we're very passionate about creating this long-term, more or less, school college improvement plan that goes along those routes, because we have to, in some cases, work with our colleagues in the school, but identify maybe areas that possibly they need to work on, but also to showcase what they're doing well. Yeah. And if we can do that across one organisation that can be shared with others, and people are willing to break down the barriers, and we live in a competitive world in education, we can't escape that because it's the way it is, not being holding bums on seats, bring that. But the point is, as a collective, to sometimes not sacrifice, but don't take ownership of everything and just say, well, actually, I can allocate that to somebody else, or we can work together on that, or we could do it. So if we didn't live in such a great competitive world, but maybe that's what government policy made for us. We made a competitive world that we live in. But the point is, if we can break down those barriers, I think it will be great going forward. And you've given us so many examples, far more collaboration that I thought was actually existing.
And what I've realized we've done, I'm wary that we're a bit East Coast, but what we've done, of course, is take you in examples from Kent through London to East Anglia. We'd want to name check the great work being done in Birmingham, notably between groups like EACT and the King Edward's Foundation, up to Bolton and York and on to Newcastle, and also EACT in Bristol. So we'll leap into Bristol, where there's a great Bristol Education Partnership, which we haven't had a chance to mention today. But it is national, but national pockets, Liam and Andy. And what we're hoping is that we can make more pockets and connect the pockets and make sure that best practice crosses them all.
So I suppose we're hoping that those independent schools that we're working with across the country and possibly across the world regarding that would actually then listen to this and approach us for any other schools in the state sector and develop that, and obviously using your expertise as well. If we can promote that collaboration, I suppose the expression is the world's our oyster, and we just have to do it, as you said, is the main point of doing this is to make a difference to children's lives, even if it's just one child to start off with, and you make a difference to that one child, then you've done your bit, haven't you?
Brilliant. Lovely to be with you guys.
No, thank you. I don't know if you want anything else to say, Liam, because obviously I've explained about what we do as a company. I've explained about SchooliP, about developing staff, and about school improvement planning, and there's also policies and things like that as well. But obviously you can see a little QR code next to my name, which you're very willing to click on there. And anyone who did attend will put it on the website anyway and share. But I know there's a colleague there who's been very quiet. I don't know if they've got a question.
It's funny that Joe should mention the Norwich school a moment ago, because we've actually got Nicola in the call from the Norwich school. So if Nicola, if you've got any questions, feel free to pop it in the chat, or I can share access for you to turn your camera and microphone on if you'd like to get involved in the conversation very briefly before we call it a day. So we'll give you a couple minutes to decide if you've got anything you'd like to add.
There's very little Nicola doesn't know about us, guys.
Absolutely. And Nicola's only vice is she's too modest.
Well, at least Nicola's met both Liam and myself now. How's that?
Brilliant. There we go.
Absolutely.
Great.
Okay. Well, we'll call it a day there. Then it's been an absolutely wonderful session. It's very clear to tell just how passionate the two of you are about these partnerships and growing a more collaborative education sector across the country. Yeah, we'll be in touch with Nicola with the recording following this, and for anyone else who registered, and obviously anyone who's watching this back in the future, if you've got any questions that you'd like to get in touch with us about, you can find our details on the website. You can find Margaret and Joe on the School Partnerships Alliance website as well, if you'd like to reach out to them directly to find out more about how your independent or maintained school can be involved in the other sectors as well. Then I'm sure they'd be more than happy to talk to you in regards to that. But I will end the event there, and we can call it a day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy and Liam. Great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Margaret.
Bye.